The summer heat in Dubai was unbearable that afternoon. Inside the massive marble mansion overlooking the Persian Gulf, 23-year-old Maria wiped sweat from her forehead as she scrubbed the already spotless kitchen floor. She had been working as a housemaid for the Al Rashid family for 6 months now, and every day felt like a test of her patience and dignity. Maria came from a small village in the Philippines where her family struggled to make ends meet. Her father had fallen ill 2 years ago, and the medical bills had buried them in debt. When the agency offered her a job in Dubai with a wealthy family, she grabbed the opportunity without hesitation. The salary was 10 times what she could earn back home. She promised herself she would endure anything for her family. The master of the house, Khalid al-Rashid, was a 38-year-old businessman who had inherited his fortune from his father's oil empire. He was tall and imposing, with a perfectly trimmed beard and designer clothes that probably cost more than Maria's entire year's salary. Khalid had everything money could buy, but he seemed to lack one crucial thing that money couldn't purchase: basic human kindness. From the moment Maria arrived at the mansion, Khalid treated her like she was invisible. He never acknowledged her greetings, never said thank you, and spoke to her only when giving orders. To him, she was just another piece of furniture in his luxurious home. But invisibility would have been a blessing compared to what was coming. That particular afternoon, Khalid was hosting a gathering of his wealthy friends in the grand living room. Maria could hear their loud laughter echoing through the hallways as she worked. They were discussing their latest business deals, expensive cars, and exotic vacations. The smell of Arabic coffee and expensive cigars drifted into the kitchen. Maria was preparing fresh fruit platters when Khalid's voice suddenly boomed from the living room. He was calling her. She quickly washed her hands, smoothed down her simple uniform, and hurried to answer his summons. Her heart always beat faster when he called her in front of his guests. Nothing good ever came from these situations. She entered the living room with her eyes respectfully lowered. 5 men sat on plush leather sofas, their traditional white thobes perfectly pressed and their gold watches glinting in the afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room smelled of wealth and privilege. Maria stood near the doorway waiting for instructions. Khalid looked at her with an expression she had seen before but couldn't quite read. It was something between amusement and contempt. He gestured toward the magnificent grand piano that sat in the corner of the room, a stunning black Steinway that Maria had dusted countless times but had never heard anyone play. It seemed to be there purely for decoration, another symbol of wealth that served no real purpose. "Maria," Khalid said, his voice dripping with mockery, "my friends and I were just discussing how my wife insisted on buying this expensive piano last year. She said she would learn to play it, but of course she never did. It just sits there, collecting dust despite your cleaning efforts." His friends chuckled, and Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment even though she had done nothing wrong. She remained silent, not knowing what response was expected of her. Khalid continued, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "I was just telling my friends about you, Maria. Where did you say you were from again? Some poor village in the Philippines, correct? I bet you've never even seen a piano before coming here, have you?" Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to respond, but the words stuck. She simply shook her head, keeping her gaze fixed on the marble floor. The truth was more complicated than Khalid could imagine, but she knew he had no interest in her truth. "Exactly what I thought," Khalid said triumphantly, as if he had just won an argument. "You people come here from your poor countries, and you've never experienced real culture or refinement. This piano costs more than you'll earn in your entire lifetime, Maria. Do you understand that?" One of his friends, a man with a thick mustache and small, cruel eyes, added fuel to the fire. "Khalid, why don't you have her play something for us? It would be entertaining to watch her try to figure out what a piano even is." The room erupted in laughter. Maria felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in front of people like this only made things worse. They fed on the discomfort of others like sharks sensing blood in the water. Khalid's eyes lit up with malicious delight. "That's a brilliant idea, Mohammed. Maria, go sit at the piano. Play us a song." Maria's heart sank. "Sir, I need to finish preparing the refreshments for your guests." "The refreshments can wait," Khalid said sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm giving you a direct order. Sit at the piano and play something for us. Consider it part of your duties today." Maria's hands trembled as she slowly walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could feel all 5 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting for her humiliation. She could hear their barely suppressed laughter, the whispered jokes in Arabic that they didn't bother to hide because they assumed she couldn't understand their language. She reached the piano bench and slowly sat down. The smooth, polished wood felt cold beneath her. She looked at the pristine keys, perfectly white and black, arranged in a pattern that suddenly felt intimately familiar, despite Khalid's assumptions. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, shaking slightly. "We're waiting, Maria," Khalid said from behind her, his voice thick with amusement. "Don't be shy. Just press the keys. Make some noise for us. Entertain us like the performer you are." His friends laughed harder now. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, she thought about her father lying in his hospital bed back home. She thought about her younger siblings who depended on the money she sent every month. She thought about her mother's tired eyes and weathered hands from years of hard labor. She thought about the life she had left behind, and she thought about a secret she had been carrying in her heart since the day she arrived in this golden cage of a mansion, a secret that Khalid, in all his arrogance and wealth, knew nothing about, a secret that was about to change everything. Maria's fingers gently touched the piano keys, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. The laughter died down slightly as everyone waited to see what kind of disaster was about to unfold. Khalid leaned forward in his chair, ready to enjoy the entertainment of watching this poor housemaid make a fool of herself. But what happened next was something nobody in that room expected. Maria's fingers began to move across the keys with a grace and confidence that seemed to transform her entire being. The first notes that filled the air were soft and delicate, like raindrops falling on still water. Then the melody grew, building into something hauntingly beautiful. She was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most challenging and emotionally complex pieces in classical piano repertoire. The room fell completely silent. The smirks disappeared from the faces of Khalid's friends. Coffee cups stopped midway to lips. Even Khalid himself sat frozen, his mouth slightly open in shock. The music that poured from Maria's fingers was not just technically perfect. It was filled with emotion, with years of pain and longing, with dreams deferred and sacrifices made. Maria's eyes remained closed as she played. In her mind, she was no longer in this oppressive mansion in Dubai. She was back in Manila, 7 years old, sitting beside her grandmother on a worn piano bench in the music conservatory where her grandmother worked as a janitor. Her grandmother, who had once been a promising pianist herself before poverty had stolen her dreams, had secretly taught Maria to play using the conservatory's pianos after hours when no one was watching. The music flowed through Maria like water through a river, natural and powerful. Her fingers danced across the keys with the muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice. Every evening after her grandmother finished mopping the floors, young Maria would sit at those pianos and learn. Her grandmother had recognized something special in her, a natural gift that deserved to be nurtured even if they couldn't afford formal lessons. By the time Maria was 15, she was already performing at small recitals in Manila. Her teachers at the conservatory, who eventually discovered her talent, had offered her a full scholarship. They said she had the potential to become a concert pianist, to perform in great halls around the world. But then her father got sick and everything changed. The scholarship didn't cover living expenses, and her family needed her to work, to help pay bills, to keep food on the table. So Maria had made a choice. She put away her dreams of concert halls and grand stages. She took a job at a local restaurant, then eventually accepted the position in Dubai because the money was better. She hadn't touched a piano in over 2 years, but the music had never left her fingers or her soul. As the nocturne reached its emotional climax, tears began streaming down Maria's face. She wasn't crying from humiliation anymore. She was crying for the life she had given up, for the dreams she had buried, for the person she could have been. Every note carried the weight of her sacrifice, and that raw emotion poured into the music, making it even more powerful and moving. When the final notes faded into silence, Maria slowly opened her eyes. The room remained completely quiet. She turned around on the piano bench, expecting to see mockery or anger on Khalid's face for somehow tricking him. Instead, she saw something she had never witnessed before in the 6 months she had worked for him. She saw genuine shock and, unless she was mistaken, a flicker of shame. Khalid's friends sat stunned, looking at each other with confused expressions. The man who had suggested Maria play Mohammed cleared his throat uncomfortably. He had been ready to laugh at a struggling maid banging randomly on piano keys, not to witness a performance that belonged in a concert hall. Another friend, a younger man named Rashid, broke the silence. "That was incredible," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Maria wiped the tears from her cheeks and stood up from the piano bench. She smoothed down her uniform with shaking hands and spoke in a soft but clear voice. "My grandmother taught me when I was a child. She was a pianist. I studied for many years before I came here." Khalid finally found his voice, though it lacked its usual commanding arrogance. "You never mentioned this when you were hired. Your file said nothing about musical training." Maria met his eyes directly for the first time since she had started working in his house. "You never asked me anything about myself, sir. You asked for a housemaid, so that's what I became. My past didn't seem relevant to cleaning your floors and washing your dishes." The words hung in the air, polite but pointed. Khalid's face flushed slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged even gently by someone he considered beneath him. But he also wasn't used to being wrong so completely and publicly. Mohammed tried to lighten the mood with forced cheerfulness. "Well, Khalid, it seems you've had a hidden treasure in your home all along and didn't even know it. Your wife's expensive piano finally got some use." But the joke fell flat. The atmosphere in the room had shifted fundamentally. The men who had been ready to mock and humiliate Maria minutes earlier now sat uncomfortable in their seats, unable to meet her eyes. They had been confronted with their own prejudice and cruelty in the most unexpected way. Khalid stood up abruptly. "Maria, you may return to your duties in the kitchen." Maria nodded and walked toward the door, her head held higher than it had been when she entered. As she reached the doorway, Khalid's voice stopped her. "Wait," he said. She turned back to face him. He seemed to struggle with his next words as if they were foreign to his tongue. "That was well done. Very well done." It wasn't an apology, and it certainly wasn't a full acknowledgement of his cruelty. But coming from Khalid al-Rashid, those few words were something approaching humility. Maria nodded once more and left the room. As she walked back to the kitchen, her legs felt weak and her heart was racing. She hadn't planned to play like that. She had thought maybe she would press a few keys randomly and endure their laughter, but once her fingers touched the piano, everything else had fallen away. The music had demanded to be released after being locked away for so long. In the living room behind her, Khalid's gathering had lost its festive energy. The men made excuses and left earlier than planned. After they were gone, Khalid sat alone by the window, staring at the piano in the corner with new eyes. For the first time in his privileged life, he was beginning to understand that wealth and status told him nothing about the worth of a person. That woman he had treated as invisible, as less than human, possessed more grace and talent in her smallest finger than he had in his entire body. In the kitchen, Maria returned to cutting fruit with trembling hands. She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe Khalid would fire her out of embarrassment. Maybe he would pretend nothing had happened. But for the first time since arriving in Dubai, she had stood in her truth, and that felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. The following morning arrived with an uncomfortable silence hanging over the mansion. Maria woke before dawn as usual, prepared breakfast, and went about her cleaning duties with her head down and her heart uncertain. She had barely slept, replaying the piano incident over and over in her mind, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by revealing her talent so dramatically. Khalid's wife, Layla, returned from her trip to Paris that afternoon. She was a stunning woman in her early 30s with long dark hair, designer sunglasses, and an air of elegance that came naturally to those born into wealth. Layla had always been kinder to Maria than her husband, at least offering a smile occasionally, though they had never had a real conversation beyond simple instructions. Maria was dusting the hallway when she heard raised voices coming from Khalid's study. The door was slightly open, and though she tried not to listen, the words carried clearly into the corridor. "You did what?" Layla's voice was sharp with disbelief. "You humiliated her in front of your friends?" "Khalid, what is wrong with you?" "Keep your voice down," Khalid responded, sounding defensive. "I didn't know she could actually play." "How was I supposed to know?" "That's exactly the point. You didn't know anything about her because you've never bothered to see her as a real person, She's been working in our home for 6 months, and you don't even know her full name, do you? There was a long pause. Maria held her breath, frozen in the hallway with her duster in hand. It's Maria Santos, Layla continued, her voice dripping with disappointment. She's 23 years old. She has 3 younger siblings and both parents are alive. Her father has a chronic illness. She sends almost all her salary home to support them. She studied music at a conservatory in Manila on scholarship, before financial circumstances forced her to quit. All of this information was in the file the agency sent us, but you never read it, did you? I don't have time to read the life story of every servant we employ, Khalid shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. She's not just a servant, Khalid. She's a human being, and apparently a highly talented one that you've been treating like dirt under your shoes. Maria quickly moved away from the door, her heart pounding. She had never heard Layla speak to her husband that way. She hurried to the kitchen and busied herself with preparing lunch, trying to steady her shaking hands. An hour later, Layla appeared in the kitchen doorway. Maria immediately straightened up and lowered her eyes respectfully. Good afternoon, madam. Would you like me to prepare something special for your lunch? Maria, please look at me, Layla said gently. When Maria raised her eyes, she saw something like genuine regret on her employer's face. I heard about what happened yesterday. I want you to know that I'm very sorry. My husband's behavior was completely unacceptable. Maria didn't know how to respond. In her experience, wealthy people rarely apologize to their staff. It's okay, madam. I'm just doing my job. No, it's not okay, Layla insisted. She stepped further into the kitchen and sat down at the small breakfast table, an action that shocked Maria. Employers never sat in the kitchen with the help. I also want you to know that I heard you're playing. Khalid recorded a video on his phone yesterday. He was going to share it with his friends to mock you, but after you played, he couldn't bring himself to send it. I watched it this morning. Maria, you're extraordinary, tears welled up in Maria's eyes. She hadn't expected kindness, and it broke through her careful defenses more effectively than cruelty ever could. Thank you, madam. Music was my life before I came here. Why did you stop? Layla asked, her voice soft with genuine curiosity. Maria hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding anymore. The truth was already out. My family needed money more than I needed dreams. My father got sick and medical care is expensive. My younger siblings needed to stay in school. I had to make a choice. Layla was quiet for a moment, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to support your family and continue with your music? Maria's heart skipped a beat. I don't understand, madam. I have an idea, but I need to discuss it with my husband first, Layla said, standing up. In the meantime, I want you to feel free to use the piano whenever you're not working. Practice, play, do whatever you need to do. That piano was wasted sitting silent. It deserves to be played by someone who truly loves music. Before Maria could respond, Layla left the kitchen, leaving her standing there with her mouth open in shock. Permission to play the piano? It seemed too good to be true, like a dream that would evaporate as soon as she tried to touch it. That evening, after finishing all her duties, Maria found herself drawn to the living room, where the grand piano sat gleaming in the soft light of the setting sun. She looked around nervously, half expecting Khalid to appear and revoke Layla's permission. But the house was quiet. Khalid was in his study, and Layla had gone to her room. Maria sat at the piano and let her fingers rest on the keys. Then she began to play, starting with simple scales to warm up, then moving into a gentle Bach prelude. The music filled the empty room, and with each note, Maria felt pieces of herself that had been broken slowly start to mend. She played for an hour, losing herself completely in the music. She didn't notice when Khalid appeared in the doorway of the living room, standing in the shadows and listening. He remained there for several minutes, watching this young woman he had dismissed as insignificant transform into someone remarkable when given the chance to express her true self. When Maria finally stopped playing and opened her eyes, she saw him standing there. She jumped up from the piano bench, her face flushing with embarrassment. I'm sorry, sir. Your wife gave me permission, but if you'd rather I didn't— No, Khalid interrupted, his voice lacking its usual harshness. It's fine. You may continue. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. Maria, I need to ask you something. Yesterday when you were playing, where did you go? In your mind, I mean. You looked like you were somewhere else entirely. Maria was surprised by the question. It was the first time Khalid had ever asked her anything personal. She thought carefully before answering. I was remembering my grandmother, sir. She's the one who taught me to play. We would practice together in the evenings after she finished her work. She died 3 years ago, but when I play, I feel like she's still with me. Khalid nodded slowly, processing this information. She must have been a remarkable woman to teach you so well. She was, Maria said softly. She gave up her own dreams so she could help me chase mine. And then I had to give up those dreams to help my family. That's how life works sometimes, I suppose. Perhaps, Khalid said. But maybe it doesn't always have to work that way. With those cryptic words, he left the room, leaving Maria alone with the piano and a small, fragile spark of hope that she was afraid to acknowledge. Something had shifted in the mansion. She could feel it in the air, like the stillness before a storm or the first light before dawn. Whether that change would be for better or worse, only time would tell. That night, as Maria lay in her small room trying to sleep, she allowed herself to wonder what Layla had meant about not having to choose. What possibilities could exist that she hadn't already considered and dismissed as impossible? In her experience, life didn't offer second chances to people like her. But maybe, just maybe, the universe was about to prove her wrong. 3 days passed with an unusual atmosphere in the Al-Rashid household. Khalid had become quieter, more thoughtful. He no longer barked orders at Maria or ignored her presence completely. Instead, he would nod slightly when she brought his coffee or offer a brief word of thanks. It wasn't much, but for someone who had treated her as invisible for 6 months, these small gestures felt significant. Maria continued to play the piano each evening after her work was finished. Music had returned to her life like water to a desert, and she found herself feeling more alive than she had in years. Sometimes she would look up from the keys and find Layla sitting quietly in the corner, listening with a smile on her face. Khalid never joined them, but Maria suspected he listened from somewhere in the house. On Thursday evening, Layla asked Maria to join her in the formal sitting room after dinner. Maria's stomach knotted with anxiety as she followed her employer into the elegant space with its silk curtains and gold accents. This kind of formal summons usually meant bad news. To her surprise, Khalid was already there, sitting in one of the ornate chairs. He gestured for Maria to sit across from them. She perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, unsure what was coming. Layla spoke first, her voice warm but serious. Maria, my husband and I have been discussing your situation. We've also been doing some research. Khalid leaned forward slightly. I made some calls to people I know in the music world. I had them watch the video I took of you playing. I hope you don't mind. Maria's heart began to race. The video she thought might be used to mock her had been shown to music professionals. She didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful. They all said the same thing, Khalid continued, and for the first time since Maria had met him, his voice carried genuine respect. They said you have exceptional talent. One of them, a conductor I know who runs the Dubai Classical Orchestra, said you're one of the finest pianists he's heard in years. He couldn't believe you weren't performing professionally. Maria felt dizzy. She gripped the edge of the sofa to steady herself. I don't understand. Why were you asking these people about me? Layla smiled gently. Because we want to make you a proposition. We've been talking about how to make this work, and we think we've found a solution that could benefit everyone. Khalid picked up where his wife left off. Here's what we're proposing. You would continue to live here in the house, but you would no longer work as a housemaid. Instead, you would become a student again. We have connections at the Dubai Conservatory of Music. They've agreed to accept you into their advanced program with a full scholarship based on your audition, which they'd like to schedule for next week. Maria's mouth opened, but no words came out. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Wait, there's more, Layla added quickly. We know you need to support your family. Your salary would actually increase. In exchange for room and board here, you would give piano lessons to our daughter. Your daughter, Maria managed to say. I didn't know you had a daughter. A shadow of sadness crossed Layla's face. She's been away at boarding school in Switzerland. She's 13 years old and she's struggling, not with academics but with confidence, with finding her place in the world. She's been asking to come home, and we've decided to bring her back and have her continue her education here in Dubai. Khalid added, Noor, our daughter, has been taking piano lessons for 3 years, but she hates it. We think it's because her teachers have been strict and demanding without being inspiring. When we told her about you, about your story and your talent, she was interested for the first time. She wants to meet you. Maria's mind was spinning. I don't know what to say. This is too generous. I don't deserve— Stop, Layla interrupted firmly but kindly. You deserve this and more. What happened here last week was shameful. The way you've been treated in this house is shameful. We can't undo the past, but we can try to make the future better. Khalid shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more vulnerable than Maria had ever heard it. Maria, I need to be honest with you. What I did to you, trying to humiliate you in front of my friends, was one of the most disgraceful things I've ever done. I've been thinking about it constantly. I was raised with privilege, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that money doesn't make me better than anyone else. You taught me that lesson in the most powerful way possible. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. She had spent months being invisible, being treated as less than human, and now this man was apologizing to her, acknowledging her humanity. I can't promise I'll be perfect, Khalid continued. I've spent my whole life acting a certain way, but I want to try to be better. Having you here as Noor's teacher, as a student pursuing your dreams, would remind me every day of what really matters. If you'll accept our offer, that is. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What about a work visa? My current visa is for domestic work. Can that be changed? Already handled, Layla said. We have lawyers working on it. You'll have a student visa through the conservatory and a separate arrangement with us for the teaching position. Everything will be legal and proper. And my family? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The money I send them? You'll earn twice what you make now, Khalid said. We've also arranged for your father to see a specialist here in Dubai. We'll fly him here next month, and one of the best doctors in the region will evaluate his condition. Whatever treatment he needs, we'll cover it. Maria broke down completely. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, her shoulders shaking. Years of sacrifice, of buried dreams, of swallowing pride and enduring humiliation. All of it came pouring out. Layla moved to sit beside her on the sofa, gently rubbing her back. It's okay, Layla whispered. Let it out. You've been strong for so long. You're allowed to feel this. When Maria finally composed herself enough to speak, she looked at both Khalid and Layla with red, swollen eyes. Why are you doing this for me, really? I'm nobody to you. Khalid met her gaze directly. That's where you're wrong, Maria. You're not nobody. You never were. I just couldn't see it until you showed me. Consider this an investment in talent that deserves to be shared with the world. Consider it an apology. Consider it whatever you want. But please say yes. Maria took a deep, shaky breath. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was too good to be true, that something must be wrong, that she should be cautious. But her heart, the part of her that had died a little bit each day of servitude, was singing with hope. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I accept. Layla clapped her hands together with genuine joy. Wonderful. Your audition at the conservatory is scheduled for Monday. Until then, you should practice as much as you want. And don't worry about any housework. We're hiring a new housemaid to start tomorrow. Your only job now is to prepare for your audition and get ready to meet Noor when she arrives next Friday. As Maria left the sitting room that night, her feet barely touched the ground. She walked to the piano in the living room and sat down. Her hands trembling with emotion, she began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, pouring every ounce of gratitude, disbelief, and hope into the music. Somewhere in the house, Khalid stood listening, reflecting on how one moment of cruelty had revealed his own emptiness and how a young woman's grace and talent had somehow given him a chance at redemption. He wasn't naive enough to think one good deed erased his past behavior, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all anyone could ask for. The audition at the Dubai Conservatory took place on a bright Monday morning. Maria stood outside the impressive modern building, its glass walls reflecting the desert sun, and felt her courage wavering. She wore a simple dress that Layla had bought for her the day before, insisting that Maria needed something appropriate for her new role. It was the nicest thing Maria had owned in years. Khalid had driven her there himself, another gesture that still felt surreal. During the drive, he had been quiet, occasionally glancing at her with an expression she was learning to recognize as concern. When they arrived, he walked her to the entrance. You're going to be brilliant, he said, and then added with a slight smile, I know because I've heard you play every night this week through my study door. Maria felt her cheeks flush. You've been listening? Everyone in the house has been listening, he replied. You have a gift, Maria. Now go show these people what I already know. Inside, Maria was greeted by Professor Hassan Al-Mahmoud, a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. He led her through corridors lined with practice rooms where she could hear various instruments being played by dedicated students. The sounds stirred something deep in her soul. This was where she belonged. This was the world she had been forced to leave behind. The audition room was a small concert hall with perfect acoustics and a beautiful Yamaha grand piano sitting center stage. 3 judges sat in the front row with clipboards and serious expressions. Maria's hands went cold with nervousness. Miss Santos, Professor Al-Mahmoud said warmly. We've heard wonderful things about you from Mr. Al-Rashid. We've seen the video of your performance. Today we'd like you to play 3 pieces for us. First, something from the Baroque period. Second, a romantic piece. And finally, something modern or contemporary. Take your time and remember, we're not here to judge your mistakes. We're here to witness your passion. Maria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She walked to the piano, adjusted the bench, and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her grandmother, of all those secret practice sessions in empty conservatories, of the years of sacrifice. This was for all of that. She began with Bach's Prelude in C major from the well-tempered clavier. Her fingers moved with precision and clarity, each note pure and intentional. The mathematical beauty of Bach's composition flowed through her, and she felt herself relax into the familiar patterns. When she finished, she looked up to see all 3 judges leaning forward in their seats. Professor Al-Mahmoud gave her an encouraging nod. Beautiful control, he said. Please continue. For her romantic piece, Maria chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in the repertoire. This was the piece that had won her the scholarship to the Manila Conservatory years ago. As she played, she poured her heart into every dynamic shift, every dramatic crescendo, every delicate pianissimo passage. The music told a story of struggle and triumph, of darkness and light, and it mirrored her own journey so perfectly that tears rolled down her cheeks even as her fingers never faltered. The final chord rang out in the silent hall, and Maria heard something unexpected. One of the judges, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, was wiping her eyes. Professor Al-Mahmoud was smiling broadly. Extraordinary, he breathed. Absolutely extraordinary. Miss Santos, for your final piece? Maria had thought carefully about what to play for her modern selection. She chose a piece by contemporary Filipino composer, Ryan Cayabyab, a work that blended classical technique with traditional Filipino melodies. She wanted these judges to hear not just technical skill, but her cultural identity, her roots, the music of her homeland that lived in her blood. As she played, the exotic rhythms and haunting melodies filled the hall with something entirely different from the European classical music that had come before. This piece was about who she was, where she came from, and the journey that had brought her to this moment. When the last note faded, the room remained silent for several heartbeats. Then Professor Al-Mahmoud stood up and the other judges followed suit. They were applauding. Maria stood from the piano bench, stunned and trembling. Miss Santos, Professor Al-Mahmoud said, his voice thick with emotion. In my 40 years of teaching music, I have rarely heard such a complete package of technical mastery and emotional depth. Your admission to our advanced program is not just approved, it is celebrated. We would be honored to have you as our student. The female judge, who had been crying, stepped forward. My dear, you have a gift that goes beyond training. You have what we call the soul of a true artist. Never let anyone make you feel small again. Maria couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She thanked them over and over, her voice breaking with emotion. Professor Al-Mahmoud explained the schedule, the classes she would attend, the opportunities for performances. It all felt like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. When she returned to the car where Khalid was waiting, he took one look at her tear-stained, smiling face and knew the answer. Congratulations, he said simply. They accepted me, Maria said, the words feeling unreal in her mouth. They said I was extraordinary. Khalid started the car, and as they pulled into traffic, he said quietly, I know it doesn't fix what I did, Maria. I know apologizing and offering opportunities doesn't erase the way I treated you. But I want you to know that what I saw in you that day at the piano, changed something in me. You reminded me that every person has a story, a gift, a dream. I had forgotten that basic truth. Maria looked out the window at the gleaming towers of Dubai passing by. I was so angry at you, she admitted. For months I felt so small, so invisible. I thought about quitting almost every day. Why didn't you? He asked. My family needed the money, Maria said. But also I made a promise to myself. I promised that no matter how anyone treated me, I wouldn't let them take away who I really was inside. The music was always there, waiting. You didn't give me that gift, Khalid. You just reminded me that I still had it. They drove in silence for a while, both processing the weight of their shared history and uncertain future. When they arrived back at the mansion, Layla was waiting at the door with barely contained excitement. Well, she demanded. Tell me everything. Maria laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed foreign in the halls where she had spent so many silent, subservient months. I got in. They said I was extraordinary. Layla hugged her tightly, something that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. Of course you are. Now come, we have so much to prepare. Noor arrives on Friday and you need to be ready to meet her. Also, I've been planning something special. What do you mean? Maria asked, following Layla inside. A small concert, Layla said with a mischievous smile, here at the house. I've invited some friends, music lovers, people who matter in Dubai's cultural scene. You'll perform for them. Consider it your official debut in your new life. Maria's eyes widened. But I haven't performed publicly in years. What if I'm not ready? Khalid, who had followed them inside, spoke up. Maria, you just awed 3 of the toughest judges in the Middle East's finest conservatory. You're ready. That week passed in a blur of preparation. Maria practiced for hours each day, selecting pieces for the concert, working with a vocal coach Layla hired to help her with stage presence and managing performance anxiety. The new housemaid, a kind woman named Fatima, took over all the cleaning and cooking duties. Maria found it strange at first being served instead of serving, but she was beginning to accept that her life had fundamentally changed. On Friday afternoon, Noor al-Rashid arrived home from Switzerland. Maria watched from the piano room as a black car pulled up and a teenage girl stepped out, looking uncertain and a bit lost. She had her mother's elegant features and her father's serious eyes. She wore designer clothes and carried expensive luggage, but there was something vulnerable about the way she hesitated at the front door of her own home. Maria took a deep breath. Meeting Noor felt almost as intimidating as the conservatory audition. This girl would be her student, but also potentially a bridge to truly belonging in this family that was trying so hard to make amends for past cruelty. She said a silent prayer that she would find the right words and stood up to go introduce herself. Not as a maid anymore, but as a teacher, a musician, and maybe, hopefully, a friend. Noor al-Rashid stood in the entrance hall of her family home, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. She was taller than Maria expected, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When her gaze landed on Maria standing near the piano room doorway, curiosity replaced the guarded expression on her face. You must be Maria, Noor said in perfect English with just a hint of an accent from her years in Switzerland. She walked forward, extending her hand with surprising maturity for a 13-year-old. My parents have told me so much about you. Maria shook her hand, struck by how different this greeting was from her first day in this house. It's wonderful to meet you, Noor. Welcome home. Thank you, Noor said, then lowered her voice and added with a slight smile, Thank you for giving my parents a reason to let me come home. I've been begging them for months, but they thought the education in Switzerland was better. When they called and said they wanted me to study piano with you, they finally agreed I could return. Layla appeared from another room, her face glowing with happiness at having her daughter home. Noor, darling, let's get you settled in your room. Maria, perhaps you could join us for tea in an hour. Noor is very eager to hear you play. An hour later, Maria found herself sitting in Noor's spacious bedroom, which overlooked the Gulf and was filled with books, a few stuffed animals that seemed at odds with the sophisticated teenager, and posters of classical musicians on the walls. Noor poured tea with practiced elegance, another skill learned at her expensive boarding school. Can I be honest with you? Noor asked, her direct gaze meeting Maria's. Of course, Maria replied, curious what the girl would say. I know what my father did to you. My mother told me everything on the phone. How he tried to humiliate you, how he's treated you badly. I'm ashamed of him." Maria was taken aback by such frank honesty from someone so young. "Your father has been trying to make amends." "People can change, can they though?" Noor asked, sounding older than her years. "I've spent the last 3 years watching how the wealthy families at my school treat the staff, the scholarship students, anyone they consider beneath them. It made me sick. That's part of why I wanted to come home. But now I wonder if home is any different." Maria set down her teacup carefully. "I think your parents are genuinely trying to be better. What matters is whether you become someone who treats people with respect, regardless of what your father did in the past." Noor considered this, then nodded slowly. "That's fair. Will you tell me your story? The real one? Not just the edited version my parents gave me." Over the next hour, Maria found herself opening up to this teenager in a way she hadn't expected. She told Noor about her grandmother, the secret practice sessions, her dreams of becoming a concert pianist. She spoke about her father's illness and the impossible choice she had to make. She even shared the pain of those first months in Dubai, feeling invisible and worthless. Noor listened with complete attention, her eyes shining with unshed tears by the time Maria finished. "You gave up everything for your family. That's incredible." "Or foolish," Maria said with a sad smile. "Sometimes I'm not sure which." "Definitely not foolish," Noor said firmly. "Brave, and now you're getting a second chance. Will you play something for me, please?" They went downstairs to the piano. Maria sat at the bench and looked at this young girl who had so much privilege, but also seemed to carry her own weight of loneliness and displacement. She decided to play something that would speak to both their experiences. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece about moonlight, about the beauty that exists in darkness, about finding light in unexpected places. As her fingers moved across the keys, Maria watched Noor's face transform. The guarded, sophisticated exterior melted away, revealing the emotional, artistic soul underneath. When the piece ended, Noor was crying quietly. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. When I play, it sounds like noise, like I'm attacking the piano instead of loving it. That's because someone taught you to fear mistakes instead of embracing expression," Maria said gently. "Tell me about your piano lessons in Switzerland." Noor grimaced. "My teacher was this stern old man who would rap my knuckles with a ruler if I played a wrong note. He said I was sloppy, undisciplined, that I would never amount to anything if I couldn't follow the music exactly as written. I started to hate practicing. The piano became like homework, something to endure rather than enjoy." Maria's heart ached for this girl who had been taught to fear the very thing that should bring joy. That's not what music is supposed to be. Yes, technique matters. Yes, you need to learn the fundamentals. But music is ultimately about feeling, about telling a story with sound. Would you let me hear you play something?" Noor looked terrified. "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up," Maria said with a smile. "I'm not going to hit you or tell you you're worthless. I'm going to listen to where you are now so I can help you get where you want to be." Reluctantly, Noor sat at the piano. Her posture was rigid, her shoulders tense. She began playing a Mozart sonata, and Maria immediately heard the problem. Every note was technically correct, but there was no life in the performance. Noor was playing like a computer, hitting the right keys in the right order, but there was no emotion, no personality, no joy. Halfway through, Noor hit a wrong note and immediately stopped, her face flushing with shame. "See? I told you I was terrible." "Stop," Maria said firmly. "First of all, one wrong note doesn't make you terrible. Every pianist hits wrong notes sometimes, even professionals. Second, the problem isn't your mistakes. The problem is that you're not breathing." "What do you mean?" Noor asked, confused. Maria stood behind her and gently placed her hands on Noor's shoulders. "You're holding all your tension here. Music needs to flow through your body like breathing. You're suffocating it. Let's start with something simple. Close your eyes." Noor obeyed, looking skeptical but willing. "Now take a deep breath," Maria instructed. "Think about something that makes you happy. Don't tell me what it is, just feel it. Good. Now keep breathing and put your hands on the keys. I want you to play the opening of that Mozart piece again. But this time, forget about playing it perfectly. Play it like you're telling someone about that happy memory." Noor's fingers found the keys, and this time something was different. The notes were still a bit stiff, but there was a hint of warmth that hadn't been there before. When she finished the phrase, her eyes opened in surprise. "I felt something that time," she said, wonder in her voice. It was small, but it was there. That's the beginning, Maria said, smiling. That tiny spark of feeling is worth more than 1,000 perfectly played notes without soul. We're going to fan that spark into a flame. Over the next few days, Maria and Noor worked together every afternoon. Maria focused less on technical exercises and more on helping Noor reconnect with why she had wanted to learn piano in the first place. They played duets together, with Maria taking the complicated parts while Noor handled simpler melodies. They experimented with different styles of music, finding that Noor responded particularly well to more modern, emotional pieces rather than rigid classical structures. Slowly, Maria watched the transformation happen. Noor's shoulders relaxed when she sat at the piano. She started smiling while she played. She began asking questions about how to express certain feelings through music, rather than just asking if she played the notes correctly. One evening, Khalid stood in the hallway listening to his daughter laugh as she made a mistake, and Maria encouraged her to try again without any judgment. He felt something tighten in his chest. This was what his home had been missing. Not just music, but joy, connection, the sound of people seeing and respecting each other as human beings. Layla found him there and slipped her hand into his. She's happier than I've seen her in years, Layla whispered. They're both healing, Khalid replied quietly. Maria is teaching Noor music, and Noor is teaching Maria that she has value beyond her talent. They're good for each other. The night of the concert arrived. Layla had invited 30 guests, all carefully selected members of Dubai's cultural and social elite. The living room had been transformed into an intimate concert space, with the piano positioned prominently and elegant chairs arranged in rows. Maria stood backstage, which was really just the hallway, wearing a beautiful emerald dress that Layla had insisted on buying for her. Her hands trembled as she heard the murmur of sophisticated voices in the living room. These were people who attended concerts at the world's finest venues. What if she disappointed them? What if this second chance ended in failure? A small hand slipped into hers. Noor stood beside her, dressed in a lovely navy dress, her eyes full of determination. You're going to be amazing, Noor said. And I'm going to be right there in the front row believing in you the whole time. Just like you've been believing in me. Maria squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you, Noor. Khalid appeared to introduce her to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for what I promise will be an extraordinary performance. The young woman you're about to hear has already been accepted into the Dubai Conservatory's advanced program. But more importantly, the concert lasted 90 minutes and Maria poured her entire soul into every piece she performed. She started with Bach, moved through Chopin and Rachmaninoff, and finished with the contemporary Filipino piece that had so impressed the conservatory judges. When the final note faded into silence, the room erupted in applause. People stood from their chairs, some wiping tears from their eyes. A distinguished older man in the front row, who Layla later told her was the director of the Dubai Opera House, was clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Maria stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. After the performance, guests crowded around her, offering congratulations and asking questions about her training and her plans. The director of the Opera House, Mr. Hamad, took her aside for a private conversation. Miss Santos, I would like to offer you something, he said in a serious tone. In 6 months, we're hosting a gala concert featuring young, talented musicians from across the Middle East. I would like you to be one of the featured performers. It would be a significant opportunity for exposure. Maria's eyes widened. The Dubai Opera House? But I'm just starting at the conservatory. I'm not sure I'm ready for something so important. My dear, if you wait until you feel completely ready, you'll wait forever, Mr. Hamad said with a kind smile. Talent like yours deserves to be shared. Think about it and let me know. Here's my card. As the guests gradually departed, each offering warm praise, Maria finally found herself alone with the Al-Rashid family. She was exhausted but exhilarated, her heart still racing from the performance. You were magnificent, Layla said, embracing her warmly. Everyone was completely enchanted. Noor hugged her next. I knew you would be amazing. Did you see how people were crying? That's the power of real music, isn't it? Not just playing notes correctly, but making people feel something. Khalid approached last. He looked at Maria for a long moment before speaking. There's something I need to tell you. All of you, actually. He gestured for everyone to sit down. Once they were settled, Khalid took a deep breath. Maria, When I first humiliated you with that piano incident, I recorded it on my phone intending to share it with friends and mock you. But after you played, I couldn't bring myself to send it. Instead, I watched that video over and over, trying to understand how I had become the kind of person who would treat another human being that way. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I grew up with every advantage money could buy, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what actually makes a person valuable. I started measuring people by their wealth, their status, their usefulness to me. I forgot that every person has a story, a dream, a dignity that has nothing to do with money. Layla reached over and took his hand. Noor watched her father with wide eyes, perhaps seeing him vulnerable for the first time. These past few weeks, Khalid continued, watching you work with Noor, seeing you pursue your dreams, witnessing the grace with which you've handled everything. It's changed me. I can't undo the months I treated you as invisible. I can't take back that moment of cruelty. But I can promise to be better, not just to you, but to everyone. You've taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. Maria felt tears welling up. Khalid, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've been wrong. You didn't have to offer me all these opportunities. You could have just apologized and moved on. But you chose to actually change to make things right. That takes courage. I had a phone call yesterday, Khalid said, shifting the subject slightly, from the medical team at the hospital. Your father arrived in Dubai 2 days ago for his evaluation. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. He's here? Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to have good news to share, Khalid said with a genuine smile. The specialists have examined him thoroughly. His condition is serious but treatable. He'll need surgery and several months of therapy. But the doctors are optimistic. They believe he can make a full recovery. Maria couldn't hold back the tears any longer. She sobbed with relief and gratitude, years of worry and fear pouring out of her. Layla moved to sit beside her, offering comfort while Noor held her hand. He's asking to see you, Khalid added gently. I thought tomorrow morning we could go to the hospital together. Your mother and siblings are flying in next week to be with him during the surgery. I don't know how to thank you, Maria managed to say through her tears. You've given me back my music, my dreams, and now you're giving me back my father's health. How do I ever repay this? You already have, Layla said softly. You've given our daughter confidence and joy. You've given our family a chance to be better than we were. You've shown us that real wealth isn't measured in money, but in how we treat others. That's worth more than any repayment. The next morning, Maria walked into her father's hospital room with her heart pounding. She hadn't seen him in 6 months, and she was shocked by how thin and frail he looked in the hospital bed. But when his eyes opened and saw her standing there, his face transformed with joy. Maria, my daughter, he whispered, his voice weak but warm. She rushed to his bedside and took his hand, tears streaming down her face. Papa, I'm here. You're going to be okay. The doctors here are the best, and they're going to make you well again. Her father squeezed her hand weakly. Your mother told me what happened. About the piano, about school, about everything. Maria, I'm so sorry you had to give up your dreams for us. No, Papa, Maria said firmly. I didn't give them up. I just put them aside for a while. And now I have them back. We're all going to be okay now. Over the next few weeks, Maria's life settled into a new rhythm. She attended classes at the conservatory in the mornings, worked with Noor in the afternoons, and practiced for hours in the evenings. Her father's surgery was successful, and he was recovering well with her mother and siblings by his side. The Al Rashid mansion transformed from a cold, formal space into something warmer. Music filled the halls at all hours. Noor was progressing beautifully, not just in technique but in confidence and joy. She and Maria had formed a genuine friendship that transcended their age difference and former employer-employee relationship. Khalid continued his personal transformation. He started a foundation to support talented young people from underprivileged backgrounds, offering scholarships and opportunities regardless of their social status. He often told people that the foundation was inspired by a housemaid who taught him more about dignity and grace than he had learned in all his years of privilege. 6 months after that fateful day when Khalid had tried to humiliate Maria at the piano, she stood backstage at the Dubai Opera House preparing for her gala performance. The venue was sold out. In the audience were her parents, her siblings, the entire Al Rashid family, her professors from the conservatory, and hundreds of music lovers eager to hear the young pianist everyone was talking about. Noor appeared backstage, holding a bouquet of flowers. "I wanted to give you these before you go on. For good luck." "You're my good luck," Maria said, hugging her young student. "Thank you for believing in me." "Thank you for teaching me that music isn't about being perfect," Noor replied. "It's about being brave enough to feel something and share it with others." Maria walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The spotlight was bright, the piano was magnificent, and her heart was full. She sat at the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a small village in the Philippines to a conservatory in Manila, from a mansion where she was invisible to this grand stage where she was finally seen. She thought about her grandmother, who had planted the seed of music in her heart. She thought about her father recovering in the hospital, because someone had shown unexpected kindness. She thought about a teenage girl learning to love the piano again. She thought about a wealthy man learning that money couldn't buy the things that mattered most. And then Maria began to play. The music that flowed from her fingers told a story of pain and resilience, of dreams deferred and dreams renewed, of humiliation and redemption, of the incredible truth that sometimes our darkest moments lead us exactly where we need to be. The performance was transcendent. Critics would later write that Maria Santos possessed not just technical brilliance, but a depth of emotion that came from having lived through genuine struggle and emerged stronger. They said her music spoke to something universal in the human experience, the eternal dance between suffering and hope. When the final note resonated through the hall and faded into silence, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. Maria stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. But this time they were tears of pure joy. In the audience, Khalid al-Rashid stood applauding with everyone else. And for the first time in his privileged life, he understood what it meant to witness true greatness. It had nothing to do with money or status or the circumstances of one's birth. It had everything to do with the strength of the human spirit, the power of talent nurtured with love and the grace of second chances. Beside him, Noor was crying and smiling at the same time. "That's going to be me someday," she whispered to her mother. "Not performing at the opera house necessarily, but finding something I love and being brave enough to share it with the world." "Yes, my darling," Layla replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Maria has taught us all to be brave." Backstage after the performance, as Maria was surrounded by well-wishers and journalists, she caught sight of her father in his wheelchair being pushed toward her by her mother. He looked healthier than he had in years, his eyes bright with pride and joy. "My daughter, the concert pianist," he said, his voice strong now. "I always knew this was your destiny." Maria knelt beside his wheelchair and hugged him tight. "No, Papa. My destiny was to learn that dreams can be lost and found again, that kindness can come from unexpected places, and that the music was always inside me, waiting for the right moment to be heard." She looked around at all the faces, some familiar and some new, all of them touched in some way by the journey she had traveled, from invisible housemaid to celebrated musician, from humiliation to triumph, from giving up everything to gaining back more than she had ever imagined possible. The story of how an Arab millionaire had ordered his maid to play piano to mock her, only to discover her extraordinary talent, spread far beyond Dubai. It became a reminder that every person has hidden depths, unseen gifts, and untold stories. It taught people that cruelty can transform into kindness, that mistakes can lead to redemption, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones with the most to teach us. But for Maria Santos, standing in the Dubai Opera House surrounded by love and possibility, the most important lesson was simpler and more profound. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in money or status. It was measured in courage and dignity, in the refusal to let circumstances steal your soul. She had learned that you could lose everything and still keep the most important thing, the unshakable knowledge of who you truly are. And with her hands still trembling from the performance, her heart full of music yet to be played, Maria knew that this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning.